PhD in vaccinology. Like, he has experience with 35 years in vaccine experience. It's development. He has developed his own vaccine actually, in one of the business companies called Sanofi Pasteur, one of the main companies in vaccines in the world. He's been developing several widely used vaccines as well. Also, he now consulting for many of the companies that's developing COVID-19 vaccine through a program called Gates Foundation and Coalition of Epidemic Preparedness Innovation. He advises the vaccine committees and development, manufacturing, quality control, and regulations. So it is a very confusing times, and we really need this informative session. So welcome, Dr. Rafat. We're very happy to have you with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Majid. Really appreciate it. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I hope you'll find it informative. And I will leave time at the end for questions and answers, because I know we have more questions than, in fact, we do have answers, unfortunately. As you know, we are gaining a lot of information as time goes by. It's certainly a new virus for us in the world, and as you can imagine, with such a devastating virus, we accumulate knowledge as we go by. So with that in mind, I will share my screen. So give me a second to see. See if I can share. Oh, it's the first time for me to use Google Meet, to tell you the truth. So bear with me until I find my presentation, which I think I have. Okay, great. So I'll put it in presentation mode and we'll start. I hope it works. Okay, great. Okay, so just to put some context to the discussion. So first, I'll give you a brief idea of SARS-CoV-2 as a virus itself. I'm sure all of you have seen it by now and know it, but just to highlight one or two important things in the virus itself. And then we'll talk about from genes to proteins, and I'll tell you why I am stressing this as we get to that slide specifically. But then I'll talk to you, for those who are not in the biology or immunology field, you may be interested in how our body fight the virus in general, but then how the vaccines help fend against, in general, any foreign agent, including viruses. How did they develop vaccines that fast? One of the major questions I face all the time from those who we call in the group of vaccine hesitancy is, how did they develop it that fast? We know that vaccines takes 10 to 20 years to develop, so how can they develop it in less than a year? I'll tell you at least what we know today. Are they safe? Because they were developed that fast, are they safe? And then obviously one of the major issues these days is variants of concerns. The original virus is no longer the original virus in many aspects. It has changed its color, and based on that, we may need to develop new vaccines against those variants. But I'll get to that when we get to. And then at the end, I'll leave time for some questions and answers. So. Okay, so this is the virus, and I'm sure you all have seen this virus before. It's the COVID virus, and what you see on the surface, this crown, is actually spike proteins. A protein is the element in your body that actually does all the functions in your body, mostly are proteins, and this is the spike protein for the virus. That is important for you to know, because all of the vaccines, and I'll talk about one or two exceptions, but all of the vaccines target this spike protein. And why is that the case? Because this spike protein is what allows the virus to attach itself to our cells and internalizes after attachment into the cells. I'll get to that quickly. But before I do that, I just want to tell you a little bit more information about COVID-19, what we know about it. In general, this is a very brief summary. We obviously know a lot more, and I'm happy to answer any question you have. But before we get into that, I just want you to pay attention that when we say COVID-19, COVID-19 is actually the disease itself. The virus is called SARS-CoV-2, or the COVID virus. But 19, when we say COVID-19, that's the disease itself. So the disease shows that not everyone is symptomatic with the disease. Many people who have the virus are not symptomatic, so we don't know. And that's one of the major elements of why the pandemic became so devastating. For example, things like, let's say, Ebola virus. It's probably one of the most deadly viruses we know to mankind. 80% of those who are infected with Ebola die. But because the infections are symptomatic all the time, we can isolate them quickly. That's why Ebola had not become a pandemic, simply because, well, it's epidemic, but not pandemic, simply because it's symptomatic. We know the symptoms, we can isolate them and kill the virus. This one, SARS-CoV-2, is actually not all the time symptomatic. And even for those who are symptomatic, the first 2 or 3 days of the infection, you can be very infectious, but you don't have symptoms. So you can walk around for the first 2 or 3 days of your infection, not knowing that you have a virus, not showing any signs of disease, but you can infect others during that period of time. We don't understand why that is the case, but we know that it happens. We don't know how long the immunity from infection is. We have data to show that we are at least 8 months immunity, which is a good thing. And the reason why we know it's at least 8 months is because the vaccines have not been around for that long, so we don't know how they last. As we gain experience with the vaccines and immunity, we will get more information. The likelihood is that it will be longer than 8 months. We know from SARS, the first SARS, those of you who recall, I would imagine that most of you were very young at that time, but in 2003 to 2005, there was a scare of the first SARS. And SARS was very deadly, but again, contained very quickly because it showed symptoms, so we can stop it quickly. The first SARS, we know that antibodies from that virus had lasted for a few years, 2 to 3 years. One of the things that is scary is that there are already several mutations of SARS-CoV-2. Thus far, however, lucky us, there is no clear evidence that the mutations impact vaccine efficacy, at least against hospitalization and death. I actually put the caption at the end here for the South SA, stands for South African variant. I'll talk about it a little later on in the discussion. But just to keep that in mind, mostly the vaccination that some of you may have already gotten would protect you, even with the variants, against the severe elements of the disease, hospitalization and death. You may still get the virus, but you will not, hopefully, die from it for the most cases. But again, we'll discuss a bit more. So let me move to some basic biology that I just want to, again, for those of you who are not in the biology field, important to know. DNA is the code of life. I'm sure you already know that. It's in the nucleus of the cells that you have. That's our DNA. That's the blueprint for our life, so to speak. What happens when we want to express a protein, let's say an enzyme, for example, the DNA, the part of the DNA that expresses that particular protein or enzyme would then be transcribed into RNA, gets out of the RNA is transcribed from the DNA, gets out of the nucleus and into the cytoplasm of the cell. Don't worry about the scientific data. The important thing to know is that DNA would transcribe or produce or help produce RNA. That's the DNA stands for deoxynucleic acid, RNAs ribonucleic acids. So it produces that, and then the RNA is translated as if you're translating from one language to the next. You're actually translating the RNA the blueprint of the RNA into proteins. Now, just be aware that I had put the arrows unidirectional. DNA produces RNA, RNA produces proteins. You cannot go from proteins to RNA, and in most cases, certainly for the SARS virus, you cannot go from RNA to DNA. The reason why I'm stressing this is that some of the most successful vaccines we have, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, that's, again, some of you have either had or heard about, is an RNA. And one of the important questions that I'm being asked all the time is, can the RNA, because this is an RNA vaccine, can it actually change our blueprint, makes us different because it's a genetic material? And the answer, based on what I'm showing you here, is this cannot happen. In order to change your genetic makeup, there has to be a DNA, but we can go from RNA to DNA. That's not possible, certainly for the SARS virus and the vaccines we have. Again, any questions related to that, I'm happy to answer at the end. Okay, so let's look at what the virus does. In essence, the SARS-CoV-2, as I mentioned, has the spike protein. This is this here shaped, the cup-shaped protein here. It's a trivalent, don't worry about it, but it's a protein on the surface of the virus, and that it attaches to what's called an ACE2 receptor. Again, don't worry about this scientific terminology, but it attaches itself to the human cell. When that happens, under normal circumstances, people who don't get sick from the virus, who are able to fight the virus, would then produce antibodies. Antibodies are the immune response of your body against any foreign agent, including viruses. So it produces an antibody that actually blocks the spike protein and therefore blocks the interaction with the receptor and then prevents the virus from getting into the human cells. Initially, you would be sick for a while because some of the virus has actually been able to get into the cells, but after a while, within about a couple of weeks or so, 12 to 14 days, you produce these very important neutralizing antibodies that blocks the virus from attaching to the human cell and therefore clear the virus from your body. In most cases, that's what happened. In a few instances, the virus overwhelms the human body and the body cannot produce enough of the neutralizing antibody. And that's when people get very sick, particularly the elderly, because their immune system is not as strong as you folks have. You know, people as old as I am don't have as good an immune response to these foreign agents as you in your age group would have. So that's when they succumb to the virus and, you know, severe consequences happen. So with that, how do the vaccines work? Now, I told you how the virus works. So how do the vaccines work? Well, the vaccines actually contain part or all of the spike protein of the virus. That's why I was telling you in the beginning that almost all of the vaccines target the spike protein. So we make part of the spike protein. And if I can go back just to show you, I can make a DNA that has the spike protein code. I can make an RNA that has a spike protein code, or I can make a protein that has the spike protein. Okay, so with that, then when that vaccine is injected into your human body, it will then fool, let's call it, fool the body into thinking that it is a foreign agent like the virus, and therefore the body will then produce neutralizing antibody against that vaccine. With that in mind, later on, when the vaccinated individual encounters the real virus after being vaccinated in the future, these antibodies bind and neutralize the spike protein of the virus and prevents the virus from attaching to the cells and therefore neutralizes the infection. Here I'm depicting all of kinds of vaccines that we have, and I'm just not going to go into a lot of detail, but just to let you know so that you can be more informed about the vaccines we have. Again, this is the SARS-CoV-2. This is the spike protein here, the surface, That is how it looks like, crystallography in a way, but these are the important spike proteins. So let's start from the left-hand side of the slide with inactivated vaccines. This is simply the old technology. We grow the virus, the actual SARS-CoV-2 virus, we grow it in big reactors, and then chemically kill it. When you kill it, still some aspects of the virus are still important and still present itself to the body. So we kill the virus, so it's not going to harm you when I inject you with that virus. And then when your body sees it, it will be able to produce neutralizing antibodies against the spike protein. This here represents mostly the Chinese vaccine. Those of us who have relatives in Egypt have actually, some of them have been immunized with the Chinese vaccine, Sinopharm and Sinovac. I'll show you a little bit more about it. That's the inactivated vaccine. The recombinant proteins, remember I told you that you can actually produce a vaccine that would have a spike protein in it. That's what we call recombinant protein. We actually are producing the spike protein in bioreactors again, and then add adjuvants that enhance the immune system and inject it into the body. One additional virus here on the right-hand side, the top right-hand side of the slide, the viral vector vaccines. This is similar to the J&J and the AstraZeneca vaccine. Sorry, I forgot to mention the recombinant vaccines. We actually don't have an example of it licensed yet, but one is about to be licensed. That's the Novavax vaccine. You will hear about it later on in the next few months or so when it's licensed. It's a Novavax vaccine recombinant protein. The viral vectors, as I mentioned, the Johnson & Johnson AstraZeneca vaccine. Again, in this, we take a virus that's not harmful to the human body, it's not harmful to us, and we put in the DNA of that virus, we put a small piece that represents the spike gene in that. So when your body encounters this virus, it breaks it apart because it's not harmful to the body, breaks it apart, sees this part here that's equivalent to the spike gene that now is making spike protein and produces neutralizing antibodies to it. So that's how it works. And then number D here is the RNA vaccines. That's the one that the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, they have gained a lot of popularity in the past few months because of their effectiveness. These vaccines, we take the spike protein, the RNA of the spike protein here, and put it in an envelope of what we call lipid nanoparticles. And these lipid nanoparticles enhance the stability of that RNA. By nature, is a very fragile molecule. That's why you heard that it needs to be kept at ultra low temperature. But here we have it enveloped in lipid nanoparticles to protect it from degradation until your body accepts the RNA. Use that RNA part, the sequence for the spike gene, to produce proteins, as I showed you earlier, and then protein, which is the spike protein, and then your body makes antibodies to that spike protein. And then finally, the DNA vaccines, almost the same idea, except it's one step earlier. There is no vaccine for DNA. There is one that's being tested now. It's from a company called Inovio, and it's being tested now. And the idea is similar to the RNA, except it's, as I'm saying, one step earlier. So the DNA will make RNA, and then the RNA will make proteins, and that's how we get there. Okay, so these are the type of vaccines we have. Important to know, we have two of those, which is the Pfizer and Moderna. These are the ones that license, and two of the viral vector vaccines, the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson, that's also licensed. Here is just a summary slide. Don't take it literally. I just want to show you a couple of things. So on the left-hand side here are the vaccines. That's the Pfizer and Moderna, the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. The Novavax is the one I told you about, going to be licensed within the next few months. Sinopharm is the Chinese vaccine. That's the inactivated, the virus itself grown and killed. And that's, many in Egypt have been immunized with that, with that Sinopharm vaccine. And then Sputnik 5, that's the Russian vaccine. That's equivalent or similar to the Johnson & Johnson and Astra, and that's the Russian vaccine. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this because for the sake of time, I'm happy to talk about each one of them. The one aspect that actually two aspects I want to draw your attention to is the last two columns. Protection against severe disease, or call it hospitalization and death. If you remove the severe disease and call it hospitalization and death, almost all of them have shown by efficacy data that they protect against hospitalization and death. So even though some are, for efficacy, some are lower, like this AstraZeneca or Johnson & Johnson or the Novavax, are a bit lower than the mRNA vaccines. For hospitalization and death, which is what you really care about, they're all 100% protective against hospitalization and death. Now, if you get a little bit of a cough or a fever or chills or a headache or body aches or stuff like that, that's okay. You get it all the time from common cold, but it protects against hospitalization and death. So the reason why I'm telling you this, if you are offered any vaccine today versus the mRNA, the Pfizer vaccine, a month from now, my advice is take the vaccine that you're offered today, because it's more important to protect against severe disease, the hospitalization and death, with any vaccine than waiting for the best vaccine, if you want to call it that, even though there is no evidence that it's best. But then you are in essence exposing yourself to potential COVID infection during that period of time between the vaccine offered today and the vaccine offered in the future. The last thing I want to tell you on this slide is the safety. All of them have been shown highly safely. Now, I know some of you have heard about potential weird and rare blood clots for AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. These are the two viral vectors. I'll speak of that at the end to discuss it. We don't know a lot about it, but we know some things that give you a little bit of comfort, at least in the discussion. Okay, so how did companies develop the vaccines quickly? As I mentioned to you, usually I developed vaccines in my past, and that was a very rapid development. It took 8 years to develop. So how can they develop? The first vaccine was licensed 11 months, only 11 months after we knew about the virus. So how did they do it that fast? Well, first of all, we're not starting from scratch. Even though it's a new virus, it is in the family of viruses like the SARS, the coronavirus, that is, like the SARS, the first SARS, as I mentioned to you, in 2003, 2004, and 5. And so we knew this about the spike protein. We knew about the virus. It didn't take long for us to ascertain that it is from the same family, and therefore we can develop vaccines rather quickly. There is also Middle East respiratory syndrome, another virus that was a scare in 2010. It actually comes from Saudi Arabia, and again, it's from the same family of coronavirus. So again, we knew a lot about it. The second important thing to note is that the technology improved dramatically. Sequencing of the spike protein took very little time to come by because the technology has evolved dramatically. Additionally, things like the mRNA vaccines, which is fast to develop, have already matured, relatively speaking, so that we can develop a vaccine with mRNA very quickly. And as I'm sure you've noticed that the two first vaccines developed were mRNA vaccines, because you can synthesize those very quickly. Accelerated administration, this is a little bit of, in the FDA and the companies themselves, so don't worry about that. But important to know that significant funding in the tens of billions have been provided to developers to develop vaccines at risk. So the US government, the world, every country, including Canada, have contributed to developers so that they don't take the risk on their own. So in essence, they took away the risk of failure, so to speak, by giving them the money up front. That is a very important element. That's why 350 COVID vaccines have been or are being developed as we speak. The other important thing is parallel activities. We did the research, development, and manufacturing all at the same time. Usually, you'd wait until you get a successful vaccine before you start building a facility to manufacture large scale. Here, we took the risk and did it. It's only money because we produced the manufacturing. So by the time we got the license, within a week, we had vaccines in people's arms. That never happened in the past. So parallel activities was an important thing for us. Large number of infected people with significantly reduced efficacy timelines. Again, I'm not going to go in a lot of detail, but just to let you know, if I have a rare disease, I need a lot of people immunized to show that the vaccine is efficacious by definition, because I need to cure somebody or to prevent somebody from getting a disease. But because it's rare, it takes a large number of people. But here, because of the pandemic, we have a lot of people infected. So when I give the vaccine, I will quickly get the data because a lot of people in the placebo group would be infected and fewer people in the vaccine group would be infected. That is an important element as well. And then the regulatory agents like the FDA and Health Canada allowed what's called rolling regulatory review. Normally, you'd finish all of the development, have a good sick file to present to regulators, and then they review it, they take their time to review it, and give you an answer a year or two later on. Here, the regulators accepted that they take rolling submission. So when I finish a piece, I give it to them, they review it. By the time they review it, I give them another piece, they review it, and so on. So by the time they finished the last bit, it took only a week or so, in some cases 1 day, for the regulators to give license approval. In this case, emergency use license. Okay, so is it safe then to take the vaccines? And the answer is absolutely. There is nothing, no important corner had been crossed. We did not at all skip any aspect of safety of the vaccine to develop the vaccines that fast. So without going into the details of this, just to let you know that the manufacturing is controlled like any other vaccine available. We have done a ton of clinical trials, 30,000 to 60,000, which is typical of any vaccine. That's how many people we have in clinical trials to do that. So in general, we have not skipped any step that is important in vaccine development to develop these vaccines. Okay, and finally, I just want to share with you the new variants of concern. You heard about it a lot, and the 5 most important ones, the UK variant, as I'm sure you all know, that variant seems to be more aggressive in transmission, so it infects a lot more people than the original Wuhan virus, but the vaccines currently on the market, all of them protect against the UK variant. So while it's important in transmission, it is not as scary from a vaccine perspective. It's scary, obviously, because it can infect a lot of people in a short period of time, but it's certainly not scary that it evades immune response. The South African variant is the one that is, this one and the Brazilian variant, these are the ones that data has shown that actually the immune response of the current vaccine is 6 to 10 times lower against the South African variant than it is against the UK variant or the Wuhan original variant. So while that is very significant and important, at least we know today that the vaccines currently available still protects against hospitalization and death of that South African Brazilian variant. The new Indian variant looks like similar to the UK in a variant in a way that it's highly transmissible, but at the same time, the current vaccines protect against. The California, that was for a period of time, we thought that this would be a variant of concern. Currently, it's not. While we don't have enough information about it, but the variant itself is fading. So it's not a major concern as we speak today. So it's likely that we'll have more variants in the future. That is clear. The viruses in general mutate, that is, reinvent themselves. Most of these are not important and they die, but some, the virus finds a way to become more infectious or evade the immune system, and that's when it becomes a variant of concern, and therefore it's important for us. So it's guaranteed there will be more variants in the future. What we need to do is to immunize as many people as we can quickly so that we can stop the virus from propagating in our bodies and therefore prevent new variants from coming together. Important thing to note is that most companies now that develop the vaccines are in fact working on the new vaccines. So the likelihood is that, let's say, by the end of the summer, in the fall of this year, we will have vaccines against the variants that are important. Most companies are working on the South African variant because it's the one that's causing a lot of concern now. Okay, with that, I will open it for question and answer. I did not get any questions from anyone. I can tell you some of the questions. If you don't have any questions, I can tell you some of the questions that I get all the time, and then we can talk about it. With that, I'll turn it back to Magid. All yours.
Thank you, Dr. Rafat. There are quite a few actually questions in the flyer that we have. There is another link that has the questions.
I see.
I can, yeah. So there are maybe 7 or 8 questions. I think you answered some of them in the presentation, but it might be a good idea to go through them if possible.
So do I have access to it, or are you going to post it, or?
I can read it out for you if you like.
Please, yes, that may be.
Of course, yeah, definitely.
Somebody put something in the chat, I think.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
So I will start with question number 1. And it says that why the push of a vaccine for a virus that has a 99% recovery rate, and why now?
Okay, interesting questions. I hope that does not reflect vaccine hesitancy. You're absolutely right. If it's somewhere between 98 and 99%. It's not 99% in some cases. However, it is heavily tilted by age group. So if you say it's let's say infection rate of 1% or less, that's in the general population. When you get by age group, let's say 65 and older, the infection rate and the severity of the infection is very high. That's the important one to consider. But let's talk about even with the 1%. Let's talk statistically. The world population about 7 to 8 billion inhabitants. 1% is 700 million, 70 million. Is that risk worth taking? 70 million would get infected, and many of those would die. I mean, that's the kind of question you want to ask. I mean, is it worthwhile when we can, and in addition to that, the economic impact is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 16 to 20 trillion dollars with a T, not a B, with a T, trillion dollars. So that's an economic impact that's huge. So the health impact is enormous, but the economic impact is even worse. I hope that answered the question. And why now? Because it's a pandemic. We have not had a pandemic since 1920 or so with the flu pandemic. So it certainly is worthwhile getting the vaccine. I hope I answered your question, but if not, please follow up.
Sure. No, that I believe answers it quite well. The other question, so question number 2, It says that ideal two-shot vaccine were supposed to be taken 4 weeks apart. The Canadian government decided to make it 16 weeks apart. What do you think about that? What are the implications of it? Actually, I can add something to it. The AstraZeneca vaccine, they say, I don't know, they say sometimes 12 weeks is the best and less than 12 weeks is not as effective, and others would say, no, it's every 4 weeks. What do you think?
Okay, so I'm going to talk and I will address this in a couple of ways. Number one, immunologically. So is it as effective to actually have longer duration? And the answer is longer than 1 month is certainly could be even more effective than 1 month's duration. Actually, Pfizer is only 3 weeks duration between the first and the second shot. But I can, from immunologically, if you take it 2 months apart, you will have a better immune response. Now, having 4 months would certainly give the good immune response, no doubt about it. The point is that you're leaving somebody vulnerable for a period of time that the risk-benefit ratio becomes a concern. Having said that, the Canadian government is looking at the benefit for the masses as opposed to the benefit for the few who got the first shot. So they say after the first shot, your efficacy rate is somewhere between 70 and 80%. Is that better? And then take the second shot 4 months later, but meanwhile, I'm giving what you would have gotten a second shot in a month, give it to somebody else who would then be protected 70 to 80% until the second shot. And they weighed that and decided that it's worth the small risk that you can get infected during that period of time between the ideal and the 4 months they're talking about. In the UK, it's 8 to 12 weeks in between, so 2 to 3 months in between. That's actually ideal as far as I'm concerned immunologically. That would be ideal. But again, it's the availability of vaccines and whether you want to get everybody immunized at 70 to 80%, or a few immunized at 98 and 95%, and some that are not immunized at all. So it's just the balance between available vaccines and risk. I hope that answers the question.
Well, thank you. It does. The next question, actually from parents. So some parents are reluctant to give the vaccine to their kids as a fear of an unknown side effect. For kids maybe 12 to 16 or 12 to 18, where parents feel that there might be side effects. What do you think?
So actually, some of you already may know that there is only one vaccine that has been licensed in the U.S. I don't even know that it's licensed in Canada yet, which is the Pfizer vaccine, licensed for 12 years and above. Very recently, in the past. There is a little bit of background, Megan. I don't know who. If everybody can put themselves on mute, unless speaking, would be great. But in any case, so the Pfizer is licensed for.
Sorry, Rafat, I muted you. Forgive me. I was checking to see if there was someone else out there. Forgive me. Rafat, you have to unmute. Forgive me. It was my mistake. My error.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't even know this. Sorry about that. Okay, so what I'm saying is that there's only one vaccine that's licensed for 12 years and above, and that's the Pfizer vaccine. Clinical trials have been done, showed that it's safe, showed that it's effective, 100% effective as well. So, and there is no reason to believe that, you have to imagine that the Pfizer vaccine has been now given, at least, more than 100 million, now probably 2 to 250 million doses have been immunized. So you can imagine, and no significant side effects have been noticed. So it becomes, the hesitancy at this point becomes very difficult to defend. because we know that it has been given to a lot of people with very few side effects, if any. And I wouldn't tell you, it is extremely, extremely safe for those people. So I hope people understand that the safety record of this vaccine, or the vaccines that we have today, is very high, that people need to rethink about it. I'm not sure what the hesitancy is, but I'm happy to talk to anybody who is, and hopefully convince them.
Right. That was really nice. Another question. Actually, I'll give you two questions. One of them is talking about the microchip, and is it a myth? The other one is talking about what your opinion on mixing of AstraZeneca and the Pfizer vaccine, if AstraZeneca is not available.
Sure. So the first one is the chip, and actually, it is one of the questions that I also get a lot. People think that the world somehow conspired to put a chip in these vaccines. That's why they develop them quickly, give it into people's arms so that they can follow people and get their information and whatnot. That is obviously ridiculous on its own, simply because it has to have everybody conspired: governments, WHO, FDA, vaccine manufacturers, funders, everybody conspired for the same. Then who's left? Because you'll be one of those in any case, and there will be a whistleblower somewhere. But that's the non-scientific response to that question, just the logical one. The scientific one is that is the size of the microchip. Again, most people who talk about this don't know about vaccine manufacturing. The last step of vaccine manufacturing, is actually passing it through a very, very fine filter, what we call 0.22 micron filter. Now, just to let you know, the smallest chip available is at least 10,000 times larger than the pore size of that filter. So we filter the vaccine. The last step is to filter the vaccine. Before we put in a vial, we filter it through what's called a sterile filtration, which is 0.22 micron pore size, the pore size of the filter. As I'm saying, the smallest microchip, IBM just announced that a few months ago, is something like 10,000 times bigger than the pore size of that. So there is no way they can put a chip in the vial because of that. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. What about the mixing of AstraZeneca?
Yes, sorry. I got so animated in my response about microchips that I forgot the second question. Sorry about that. So yes, mixing. There are lots of clinical trials now, what we call a mix and match clinical trials that are ongoing. And actually one has, at least the safety part has been concluded in the UK, where they are mixing AstraZeneca followed by Pfizer vaccine, or vice versa, Pfizer followed by AstraZeneca. And it's a reasonably large trial that showed not only are the vaccines safe, but that the immune response is very good, whichever way you go, AstraZeneca or Pfizer. Now, it hasn't been licensed yet, so it's going through the regulatory process to license the mix and match, but it's certainly data thus far are encouraging that, in a short period of time, we hope that the regulators would license that mix and match.
Thank you. So the last question is asking, who can not get the vaccine other than a person having allergies to one of the ingredients, but who is not supposed to have the vaccine?
Okay, so actually, you're asking a vaccinologist. I tell you, everybody should get a vaccine, even those who get allergy from even the ingredients, known allergy to ingredients. And actually, just to tell you a personal story, my sister is very, very allergic to almost everything. She's one of those people are allergic to everything, almost everything that she can, or scared of everything that would cause allergy. And she asked me that, and I said, the easiest thing is to go and get the vaccine and have with you an antihistamine or anti-allergic drug or the EpiPen. Those who have allergy, severe allergy, walk with EpiPens. If you feel that you get the allergy, you just inject yourself with EpiPen or take Benadryl. So I told her, go, wait 20, 30 minutes in the doctor's office or the pharmacy until you're safe, because allergic reaction, anaphylactic reaction will happen very quickly. And if that is the case, just take the Benadryl and then you're okay. We know how to treat allergy if we are looking for it. We know how to treat it, but we are not as confident in treating COVID-19 as we are with allergy, and therefore my advice is to take that. Now let's talk about other diseases. Some of the ones that are very common question would be those who are immune compromised. And clearly immune compromised people don't have as good immune response as you and I would have. However, the only issue with the immune compromised individual is that they may not get as good an antibody, as good a defense as you and I would. Having said that, a minimal response, a minimal immune response, certainly better than zero immune response. Imagine those immune compromised people, if they got infected with the COVID vaccine, with the COVID-19, then the consequence is much more dramatic than anything that the vaccine would do. So even the immune compromised should take. Those who are undergoing, God forbid, cancer treatment, who are taking immune suppressants should get it because of the same reason. You know, the worst that could happen is that you don't get as good an immune response, but it's not contraindicated. Some of the things that are a little bit more tricky is a pregnant woman. Now, while there is no indication specifically pregnant women, there has been pregnant women and lactating women actually in clinical trials. Just by happenstance, they found them after they started the trial. And with that, it's shown to be safe and no problem. And so if my daughter is pregnant or getting pregnant and she asked me, I'd say absolutely take the vaccine. You probably will protect yourself and your fetus, the unborn as well. Now, having said all of that, all of what I'm saying, you have to talk to your physician, attending physician, because they know your case. I don't. I'm just talking from science and immunology and vaccinology only. So everybody should get the vaccine.
Right on, let's go. Thanks a lot, Doctor. That was a really, really nice, informative session. Guys, do you have any other questions that you'd like to share with us? All right, I guess everyone is happy. So
perfect. I have a quick question, Megan.
Sure.
I was just wondering about should we be worried that the variants of concern, that there might develop one that would be more dangerous towards kids who are not currently immunized?
Well, there's certainly, this is a concern for sure. And I can tell you, I'm personally spending a ton of time in my consultancy worrying about it and actually working with companies to develop as quickly as possible vaccines against any variants that come. For sure, that's a scare, no doubt about it. The South African variant specifically has caused a lot of concern because its transmission rate is reasonably high, but it's evading the immune response. And we can talk about how it evades the immune response. We obviously know how it does that, but the point is that it is a scare. Companies are developing now technologies. I'm working with the Coalition of Epidemic Preparedness Innovation to find technologies so that we can respond quickly to a new variant if and when it becomes a variant of concern. So our goal, in fact, at CEPI, which is the company I consult for, is to develop vaccines within 100 days from identifying a variant of concern. So yes, it is a concern, but we are getting better at developing vaccines and knowing about it much earlier so that we can nip it quickly before it becomes a major concern.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thanks again. Abuna, if you'd like to lead us for a small prayer.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Raf.
Sure.
In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Thank you, Lord, for gathering us today. Thank you for allowing us to sit together and you to be in the midst of us and for us to learn something new, something informative, Lord. Please, Lord, we ask you to take care of everybody who is sick or in need of healing, Lord. There's a lot of people that are suffering out there in the world. Please, Lord, help each and every one, Lord. Be with us and don't leave us alone. Thank you, Lord, for always protecting us and for being with us, Lord. Lord, please, those who are suffering, again, help them. Lord, we ask you that you soon open for us end this pandemic and open for us so we can meet each other and we can all be present together in church and to enjoy being with you, Lord, here and in church. Please, Lord, those who have exams, be with them and help them. Those who have exams that are coming up, those who are waiting for the results, Lord, through the intercessions of Saint Mary, the prayers of all the saints, here's and pray all that is given. Our Father who art in heaven, on earth as it give us this day, forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God, amen.
Thank you, Abuna Tashfid Salli. Happy to have everybody here. Have a great night, guys, and see you next week.
Thank you, everyone, for inviting me. I appreciate it, and good luck.
Thank you, Dr. Rafat.
God bless.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rafat.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doc.
Thank you. Take care, guys.
Take care.
Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.